Hi. In the early 1970s, I worked for a bookmaker's. It seems like yesterday to me, of course, but it's actually 50 years ago now. Uh, at that time, I lived with a woman called Maureen, Mo to her friends, and she came from Scotland. Her family lived in Dunfermline, which is just over the water from Edinburgh. And I often went up there with her to visit them and stay with them. Her father, Pat, was or had been a miner. Then he was a safety officer in a mine, so it was his job to oversee the working and check the general safety of the mine. There are a number of dangers in mining, even high-tech mining as it was then. Gas and dust and stuff like explosive materials. Anyway, as a result of that, I often went to miners' galas, miners' galas, as they called them, which are a sort of family day out, games for the children, brass bands, bit of marching. Probably they got out the Union banners and paraded them around. There was a lot of pride. But it was basically a family picnic, a day out for the workers. I also accompanied them on many evenings to the Miners' Social Club, which was a kind of it was like a nightclub really. People put on their best clothes to go there. The drinks were relatively cheap, and the entertainment was sometimes homemade. People sang and danced, and sometimes they got entertainers to come in. But it was an important social hub for them. On one occasion, Pat invited me to come to him for the day to see what mining was like, to go down the mine and see for myself. So I jumped at the chance to see how the other half worked. I'd grown up in essentially a lower middle class family, and my father went to work in a suit and tie, and we owned our own home. I went to a middle class school, so although I've worked with a few working people in my life, and I suppose I'm sort of I'm a middle class boy in a working class overcoat. But anyway, this was my first experience, a chance to experience heavy industry, of which I have no other experience. Anyway, we went down this mine, and it was a modern, state-of-the-art mine. It was very efficient, and the way it worked is called a long wall mine, long wall. And what they do, first of all, there's no lift shaft down to. You don't get on a lift and go down a shaft to this mine. Everything's on a kind of, the tunnels are bored at an angle down to the coal field, and these tunnels vary in size. Some of them are roadways, and you could drive a lorry down there, and they do drive lorries down there, in fact. And some of them are a little narrower. In order to get to the mine work, we went on a train, a little electric train, and this goes down at an angle down to the mine levels, which are hundreds of feet below ground. Now, obviously there are larger roadways driven down there, and there are lorries and bulldozers and jackhammers and all kinds of other machines working away down there. But the coal is brought back to the surface on a conveyor belt, and there are lots of conveyor belts in this mine. Moving around underground, you often have to crawl under or duck under a conveyor belt because they're running from the coal seam back up to the surface. And the way they mine is they dig two parallel tunnels about 400 meters apart down in through the coal seam, and then at the end of those tunnels they dig a third tunnel along which they do the actual mining. There's a huge excavating machine which has giant wheels on arms that have studs on those wheels the size of your leg, and they grind away at the face of the coal and gradually mine back towards the beginning of the tunnel. So they're always moving. This tunnel is always moving backwards to where it began, and the boring machine goes up and down, the mining machine goes up and down, and the spoil falls onto a conveyor belt which carries it off to one of the tunnels where it's loaded onto another conveyor belt and goes back up to the surface where it's sorted and graded and fed into hoppers ready for transport onto its final destination. So the boring machine is moving backwards and forwards in this third tunnel and gradually moving back up towards the start of the field. And behind it there's a kind of walkway where people can move along, maintain the machines. Miners can move up and down it. It's a little walkway, and behind that are these sets of giant hydraulic jacks, and they are holding up the ceiling above that walkway and that mining tunnel. And the jacks are being walked forward. They're moving gradually. Every time the grinding machine makes a pass, it takes off maybe a foot of the rock, and everything has to move forward a foot. And the jacks are designed so that they can walk. And what's happening behind them is that the ceiling is gradually settling and collapsing, but the miners and the mining machine are able to walk under the protection of these jacks which hold the roof up. Anyway, it's an extremely noisy process, a very dirty process, and well, I would have thought quite dangerous too. You certainly need to know where to stand and what to do, and that machine will chop you in half in a second. At the end of the day, we came back up to the surface on a conveyor belt. Actually, we jumped on one which wasn't loaded with coal or anything. It was just a man belt, and we jumped on it, lay down, and gradually moved back up to the surface, where you're absolutely filthy. I was absolutely shattered, although I hadn't actually done any work. I'd basically just walked around down there, but I was jiggered, and I was filthy. So what you do is you get off your overalls, your helmet, and you also have a little brass tag, and I think what you do is you get two brass tags when you're going down the mine. One of them goes in a box and you take the other one with you, so that if there's a disaster down the mine, God forbid, they will know by looking in the box who's down there, how many people are down there, and when they find the bodies with the tags on them, they know who they are. Anyway, we come back up, take our clothes off, have a shower, because this modern mine was equipped with its own showers and lockers and so on, and we scrub ourselves clean, get our everyday clothes on, and go home. And as I say, I was absolutely knackered. I have nothing but respect for the men who work down there. That it's a hard job. Nobody would choose to work there unless they were prepared to work hard. Now, in the 70s, like the mining industry, many industries in this country were in public ownership, and one thing they by and large had in common was that they all needed investment. Things like water, power generation, railways, essential services which everybody required, and natural monopolies. They belonged and should never have left public ownership. Other things like prisons, hospitals, armed services, justice, maintaining the road network, even some public housing. These are they're of a nature industries, but they're functions of state, and they belong. I mean, you can't have a state without a power generation industry. You can't have a state without prisons and armies and I would argue a health service. So some aspects of these industries may be carried out by private companies, but by and large they are the responsibility of government. And then there are legacy industries like mining, like steelworking. We wouldn't probably want to build or open a mine now, but the mine I visited was as efficient as it can get. I mean, you could probably buy coal cheaper from Poland or somewhere where it was mined under totally different conditions, and labour was in a completely different situation, but it was efficient, it was modern, it was safe. But there were other mines that were nearing the end of their life, and there were many people employed in those mines. But that's the other function of industry, really. It isn't just all about money. It's not all about the bottom line. Those industries serve a social purpose as well. I mean, many of them, mines, steelworks in particular, but also things like railways. We built our own trains in those days, believe it or not. Were organised around one town or one village, where that was the main source of income for the village, and all the other people in the town or the village depended on that income to a greater or lesser extent. They provided the services, the shops and the hairdressers and whatever. And so a lot of people were employed as a result of those industries. And those people, well, their children went off to free education. Sometimes they moved onwards and upwards to further education and moved out of those societies. Two of Pat's daughters did exactly that. They educated themselves and moved on to a different sort of life. His son, who would perhaps otherwise have followed him down the mine, instead of being the aimless drifter that he has become, the sad and aimless drifter, I should say. He could have been part of a community, and that's what those industries provided, a community. You wouldn't want people working down a coal mine now producing coal. No, times have changed. Those days nobody had heard of global warming. Nobody even thought of it as a possibility. I think we assumed we were heading into the next ice age. Anyway, those industries employed a large number of people, and you can't be a state, you can't be a country without power generation, without making some steel. These days we pay other people to do it. All our income comes from banking and insurance, I suppose, and service industries, but it's not that we don't require those things anymore. It's not that we don't need steel. It's just that we're paying somebody else to do it somewhere else. Some of the industries that are in national ownership, like British Airways, Rolls-Royce, I think probably some of the other motor manufacturers as well, it's arguable that they could be better off in a private ownership, where they'd have access to private equity and they were potentially competitive international businesses. As I say, it's arguable. I wouldn't personally argue it, but there were a few that where it was justifiable. Privatisation was justifiable. But as I say, most of these industries, what they were short of was investment. And in the 70s, what came on stream was a huge source of income: North Sea oil and gas. I believe one year it more than paid for the entire borrowing requirement of the government. So it was an enormous influx of cash and capital into the country, which could have been used to modernise those industries, to bring them up to date, make them competitive on a world in a world stage. Maybe some of the industries would have to go and close. Maybe they'd served their purpose, their time was up. But others could have been modernised and improved. But instead of that, what did we get? Margaret Thatcher. And what did we get? Oh, she used that huge influx of cash to beef up police pay and destroy the industries which we had in this country, like mining and the steelworks in particular, but also other things like motor manufacturing. We don't make cars here anymore. Well, barely. I mean, a few. I think our largest car manufacturer is Morgan. We assemble things. Other people send us the bits and we put them together. Anyway, that was my story of the day down the pit. That was when I went down the pit. And thank God it was the one and only time I ever did. So anyway, I'll see you later.